What we're going to do today is I have a crawl space that the door or the little hatch, the little cover that goes over getting in a crawl space, over time getting wet down there, and it was just basically a plywood at the bottom of it, and it soaked a lot of moisture and it rotted away, probably an inch worth of it. So I'm going to build another one. I'm going to put a little bit of a frame around it and some treated wood, and then that way it should stand up to the moisture a little bit better. And I'll put a lining on the inside of the plywood, and this is going to be the way I'm laying it out. I have the dimensions for it, so I'm going to lay it out, turn it around here. I'm going to lay it out on this piece of plywood right here, what I want the outside dimensions of it to be, and then I'll have all the dimensions down there, and then I'll be able, when I build it, I'll be able to line it up on here and make sure it fits like it's supposed to. So let me go ahead and I'll come back when I get the dimensions marked out on here, and then we'll go from there. For those that know kind of what's going on, this is what they use, drywall square. You can also put different angles on them. But what I'm going to do here is, this is a factory edge. It was some plywood I pulled out of when I did the camper fixing of the camper. It's a tongue and groove. So this is a factory edge right along here. So I know that is straight. And I'm going to use this up against here, so now I have a square angle there, and I will mark off a spot on here that's going to be straight, because if you come down here and look, you can see that these aren't straight edges down here. You can kind of see by putting this down here, you can see how far that's off there. So that was just ripped out, but this is a factory edge. So I'm going to get a good straight edge on here, and I'll start laying out how big I want the opening, and I can use this as a template when I'm building the pieces. And I'm going to use some treated wood for it. I'm going to use some of these. These are, actually they're used when you get pallets full of stuff. And you can see here's the end where they can strap it down. And that's what's on the bottom and top of them. They go on this way, and then you can band them down to band big loads of all kinds of stuff, anywhere from concrete mix to any building materials. So let me get the straight edge laid out on one of these, and then we'll come back, and then I'll write down the dimensions that I need for everything, and we'll start laying it out. I have it laid out, and the panel that goes in there is 34 1/8 of an inch from side to side, 18 1/4 inches up and down, and it needs to be 1 1/4 inch thick. And I'm replacing the two boards on each side because those are rotten out as well. And those are 18 1/4 inches tall. One didn't show up too well. And it is 1.5 inches thick, where the panel's only 1 1/4 inches, so it sticks out a 1/4 inch longer. And then it's 1 3/4 inches wide. So I need to cut two pieces that are at least this long. What I'll do is I'll actually trim them to final length once I get on site. At there, we have a miter saw there, so it won't be any big deal, and I'll mark it that way instead of trying to measure it now and getting it too long or too short. I have to trim anyway or make a new one. I'm going to make it a little bit extra long. I'll probably make it 18 1/2 or 18 3/4 inches long, and then I'll have those two side pieces. Those I'll replace first. I'm going to make this big enough with the frame on the outside so that I can take and plane it down if I need to get a little better fit. So that's what we're going to make. And I started laying it out, and I have the first line of where we're going to do it right here, which was square off of the factory edge. And then I marked this line here that I have. Now, when I get ready to rip this length, I'll be able to rip to the length because I'll be able to put that against the side of the table saw. So I have a good straight edge to trim it down. And then we'll just have to see how we're going to lay it out. I think we're going to go with the height of about 18 inches off one way, and then 34 inches so when we cut, we'll cut off that length. So let me go ahead and lay out the panel on here, and then I'll come back once I get that laid out. Before we start doing any cutting, we're going to make sure that everything is nice and square. So I've got a square, and on these you want to make sure we track it back far enough so that you get a good edge on there. You need to make sure you have one that actually is square. You need to test that out. There's ways of testing it out, but I'm going to put this up against the miter gauge and slide this over and make sure it lines up over here, and it does, because I did have to adjust it. It was off just a little bit. And then the other thing you want to do is make sure that you have the blade is square. Now, while I'm playing with this, Here's the power cord for the saw, so I know it's not powered up. Haven't plugged it in yet. I have the blade guard in here. If you don't have a blade guard, if you're not making through cuts, then you'd put in like a little writing knife here that goes back here. That helps keep the board from catching the back of that blade and throwing it back at you. You want to do this as well. When this is off, all you do is you put the square on like this, make sure it's square, line it up. Make sure you're not hitting on one of the teeth because they stick out further. You want to make sure you're going in between the teeth. So I've got this all set up so it's going to be square cut. Whether I'm pushing this through, it's going to be square, or I'm ripping, it's all going to be a nice square cut. So that's one thing in setting it up. Make sure you get your table saw set up so that you're cutting nice square corners. I'm going to start with the side pieces. Those come out of the bigger ones. Now, remember I said I have some boards that have a little groove in them. The boards with the deeper groove will be able to work for the frame, but it won't work for the side pieces. So this is long and wide enough. I'll be able to get my 1.5 inches out of there, so I'll be able to make that work. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off the end of this to get rid of any bad splits or anything in there. Make sure it's a nice square corner. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to put the camera on pause, and then we'll come back once we get it cut. And you want to make sure you get it in here, and with this piece I added on here, I know exactly where the blade's going to cut because it was with this blade. So I can see that that's how much it's going to cut off, and I'll just readjust this until I get where I need it to be. And I'll come back once I get the end trimmed off, and then we'll show splitting them. Well, you can see I took the blade guard off, put the writing knife back here. The problem I ran into is this block I added on here is too tall and it hits it. So I took that off. I cut the first piece off, and you can see it split. So there's a split in here. And if you look at it real close, you can see it goes down to right about here. This is long enough, so I took a look at this other end. This other end looks good. So I'm going to trim that off, and I'll go work off this end. This I'd cut off much better, so I'll work off that end because we'll throw away the scrap pieces there at the end. And this is treated wood, so it'll stand up better, so you can't burn it because it releases the toxins, and we'll dispose of it properly. I don't need 19 inches, but I went ahead and cut the first piece at 19 inches, and to get them the same length, I'm cutting them down so that I don't have to push such a long piece through the saw. I can push a smaller piece. So what I'll do is with my fingers, I can feel them, line them up here, what they're lined up. And then I'm going to look at, let's go over here so you can see where it cuts. And then I'm going to line this up so it's going to cut the same length as the other one. And then they'll all be both the same length. Okay, back on our little drawing, this board here, I've got 19 inches so I can trim it to final once I get ready. And it needs to be 1.5 inches thick and 1 3/4 inches wide. So if we take a look at this board, it needs to be 1 3/4 inches wide. And we are, looks about 2.5. And then our thickness is going to be our 1.5 inches. Our thickness here is going to be our 1.5 inches. So we have that in here. So I'm going to cut the one dimension here, and then I'll cut the other dimension here. And they can be rounded, it doesn't really matter. So that's what I'm going to go ahead and get this piece cut. I'll use the fence for this one. And I'm going to see if I can put the blade guard back in and still be able to make my cuts. All right, I'm going to set the 1.5 inch distance first. So I put it to 1.5 inches, and then I also, with the tape measure, I measure it to see how long it was actually. So I was able to put this down over here and measure that it was 1.5 inches. And now I can verify that that is correct. You always don't want to, unless you know for a fact that these are on. And once you know that, then you're okay. So now what I'll do is I'll adjust the blade, because that's way too high for it. So you want to adjust it down so you have pretty much the teeth are coming above it. A little bit of about halfway through there. That seems to be a good place to do it. That way you don't have a lot sticking up. The higher it sticks up, the more chance you have of actually coming in contact and cutting fingers off. And we don't like to do that. That's not fun. Well, we have the board's cut down. These are the scrap pieces here, and that's how wide it's going to be. Now I need to cut the thickness. So this ridge has got to come off here. So I need to send it through, probably this way be the easiest way, and cut off that ridge. And I'll set that to the 1 1/8 or 1.5 that it needs to be. What do I need to do? Let me come back here and look at my chart. So I have 1.5 inches in one direction, 1 3/4 in the other direction. So I did 1.5 inches in that one direction. I need to do 1 3/4 inches in the other direction. So, well, I might have to do these again. Okay, now the other dimension for this is 1 1/4 inches. So I set this down to 1 1/4 inches, and I'm going to go ahead and trim these other pieces off, and we'll go from there. First, cut the top piece to 34 1/8, which is the width I need. And now the key to making something square is all four sides have to be in relation. So the top and bottom have to be the exact same length, and the sides have to be the exact same length. And if so, then you're going to have a square frame. If you're not, then it's going to be off. So it's very important. So what I'll do is I'll go down here in the end. I'll line those up with my fingers so I can feel they're the same. Now I could always take like my square and put on there and line it up. I might do that as well, but lots of times your fingers can feel it real easy. And then I'll line up and then I'll cut them so that they're the same length. Now the next thing about the way I have this set up is I can feel down at that end, and then I have in here, you can see a little bit of a gap. So let me go over here and see now. Let me go over here and see. Now as I line this up, I can put my finger in there and I can see if it lines up the same. So that's something you can do is make sure you have it lined up, because if you look down here, you can see where it slides back. So I can kind of feel that. Of course, the other option instead of marking what I'm doing is to cut them both at the same time. So you line up this end, you put your mark on it, line the mark up with the hole that's going to cut, and cut them both at the same time. And now you know they're exact the same length. So we'll get these cut, and then we'll start putting the frame together. Frame pieces are all cut. So I cut them so that they're all the same thickness this way, and if I turn them this way, they're all the same thickness there, because these I'm going to make in the frame. So one's going to go down at the bottom, one's going to go to the top, and then one on each side. And that's going to be my frame. I just got to figure out exactly what kind of joint I'm going to use, if I'm going to use a half lap or mitered or how I'm going to do it. I want a fairly solid one. And then what I'll do is I'll take and I'll cut part of this out, leave a recess to put the plywood in, and then I'll take and I'll cut part of the plywood. So this is I think it's 5/8, so I'll do like 3/8 or something like that, or I may get a piece of 1/2 inch or 3/4 plywood and put in there, and then so now there'll be inset, but it'll be flush on the outside, so I won't have any place for water to catch. And that's the next thing, is get the frame pieces laid out and cut to length. Once I decide which joint I'm going to use, and we'll come back once I get ready to start cutting the joints.